G'day there, ladies and ledians. Welcome. It's not welcome back to anything, as this is going to be the first and probably the last time I'm going to be doing this for this topic. But welcome to the stream. Yeah. I wanted to take a few days from the Pokemon Day, Pokemon Presents, to really kind of think about it. I did have some thoughts about the Presents as it was happening, but I wanted to have a few days to really kind of think about it, just to either confirm or deny what I'm really thinking and feeling about it. And to be honest, I gotta say that this Pokemon's 30th anniversary was not good. I don't know if it's just me, but it, like, for what a 30th anniversary is, right? You know, it's a pretty big milestone, 3 decades. It felt like we had, like, basically nothing. Now, I mean, we didn't really get nothing, and so I will be going over what we did get in the Presents. But, you know, we're just gonna go for it one at a time. But the majority of the things announced in the Presents, we already kind of knew about. Like, we knew that the mobile games would get an update. We would... Hang on. I have to switch over my internet. That might make it easier. Alright, yeah, so we already knew that the mobile games would get, you know, different kind of updates. You know, Pokemon Unite, Cafe Remix, Sleep, Pokemon Go, Masters EX, TCG Pocket. I think that's the majority of them. But yeah, we already knew that they would get updates. Hello Moon, how's it going? You're in time for me to rant about the Pokemon Presents. I know that you kind of already know some of my opinions on it, but I wanted to take a few days to kind of reflect on it, you know? So, you know, I'm open to discussion, so if you want to ever, like, you know, interfere or, I guess, contribute, that's all good by me, you know? Yeah, so we already kind of knew that the mobile games would get updates, right? So that wasn't really new. We already knew about Pokopia from like last year, so that's not a new announcement, right? We already knew about Pokemon Champions, right? So, in terms of like all that, that could have been announced on any Pokemon Presents, like those kind of updates, right? And so, they weren't really for the anniversary, they could have just been any year, right? But the only new stuff that we got announced this year was the Game Boy MP3 player, which we'll get into, and Pokemon Winds and Waves, Gen 10. But because Winds and Waves is like next year, is it really part of Pokemon's 30th anniversary? Like, if they announce Pokemon Winds and Waves next year, you know, would that have really changed anything? You know, so like, in terms of, for the actual anniversary, right, we've had the mobile games getting updates, we've had Winds and Waves for next year, but that's not for the Pokemon's 30, that's for the Pokemon's 31, you know? All we really got was the Game Boy Mini MP3 player. I don't think we count it personally as part of 30. We really only had MP3. Exactly, that's what I'm saying. Like, you know, Gen 10 is technically Pokemon's 31st anniversary, right? You know, and sure, like, Pokopia and Pokemon Champions are coming out this year. But because they were announced last year, they're more of like a Pokemon 29, you know? So, in terms of, like, what we got for Pokemon's 30th year announcement, and will be releasing in Pokemon's 30th year, all we really got was the Game Boy MP3 player. And we didn't even get a proper ending to the Presents. Yeah, that man, the pacing on that was weird. They didn't explain anything about Winds and Waves, like what the region name is, you know, where the setting is located, which I think is supposed to be Indonesia, based off kind of the tropical island kind of vibes. But I guess we'll kind of get to that. But I would like to... It was bizarre, we legit didn't get much of anything. Yeah, so trust me, we'll be talking about the entire thing one step at a time. Plus, all we got were the starters. Yeah, it would have been cool to see a few extra Pokemon, you know, maybe like just a basic bird or, you know, dog or something. Well, besides the starter. You know what I mean, like the Fido, the Poochyena, that kind of stuff. Like, it would have been cool to get something like that. But, of course, we will get to it. But for now, we'll start with the Game Boy MP3 player. Now, talk about Gen 1 pandering, eh? Like, this is... Okay, so I'll explain what it is. It is a little Game Boy case thing, as you can kind of see on screen in the hand, right? It plays certain cartridges, which are Game Boy versions of... Well, maybe not Game Boy versions, but they are the first generation music in a Game Boy cart that can be played in this little Game Boy player that plays it in a GB style, right? So what you get is you get 45 cartridges for 45 songs. It's not each, it's all together. So, I don't really know who this is for. Because, like, if you're, say, at a party, right, and you're like, oh man, let's listen to Gen 1 Game Boy music, right? You put in the Pokemon Center music, and then in about, I don't know, 1 or 2 minutes, you have to get up, switch the cartridge over to the next thing, and then, like, hit play or something, right? Like, who is this really for? Like, if it was 45 songs in one cartridge, maybe. If it was pre-built in, also pretty good. And Moon, I mean, listen, as a novelty, it's cute, and any other year or as an addition to a big announcement, I would like it. Yeah, like, it just feels really out of place, really. Like, and I was thinking about it, what could they really do to make this worthwhile, right? And I'm thinking, if they had the different generations as different cartridges, so if you had a cartridge for Gen 5 music, you had a cartridge for Gen 6 music kind of thing, but it was in the Game Boy kind of sound chip, or sound font, or whatever, you know, like, it, as if it was like a Gen 1 version of that music, that would be interesting, because that would require actual effort, you know, because you would have to think about how you would compose that for the limitations 30 years ago. And so, like, how would you do the Gen 5 music on a Game Boy? So, I feel like this little Game Boy MP3 player would have been a little novelty, like a little collector's item like 30 years ago. But nowadays it's just really redundant. Like, probably whatever device you watch the Presents on could act as a better MP3 player. It feels like a 90s throwback that didn't quite hit the mark, reminiscent of the Fat Picker being re-released. Yeah, like, they really love the Gen 1 pandering. Like, Gen 1's in everything, man. Like, even Pokopia, right? What are the first Pokemon that you get to see when you're, like, recruiting new ones? You get to see Bulbasaur, Squirtle, Charmander. Really? It couldn't have been any other Pokemon? It had to be those three? You know? Like, Gen 1 pandering is all over the place. And, like, it's an okay gen. You know, like, it's not... It doesn't particularly hold up well. It's an alright one, but I don't think it's anything to really warrant this kind of love for it, you know? I mean, it's okay if you do, and it looks like you do, Moon. You love Gen 1, obviously, but even you're disappointed. Wow. You wouldn't... Okay. Do you know the price for this MP3 player? That's a good question. Do you know the price? Because, from what I hear, the price for this little GB MP3 player has been estimated to be between 64 and 70 US dollars. Let that sink in for a moment. Paying about $70 for 45 cartridges, 45 songs on a Game Boy MP3 player. It can't even do other, generations or anything. All you really get is like a little lit up screen about like what the music is kind of referencing. Like, trainer battle is like, yeah, sure, there's a trainer. Like, I don't know who this is for, really. I would have preferred like an MP3 player with all of it built in. Would have preferred MP3 player with cartridges for the different generations. Like, I don't know who this is for. Seriously. Like, would the Gen 1 fans even want this? How many Gen 1... I want to say boomers, but like, how many Gen 1 fans are tuning into Pokemon's 30th and being like, oh, I must get that. That's the perfect addition to my collection. 30 for 30 cartridges. Cartridges would have been better, but even then, no, that's awful. Yeah, so, I mean, I haven't, confirmed it myself, but other people are speculating that it is between, 64 and 70 US dollars. And if that is true, that is a total ripoff. That's why I'm a good representation of this ask. I am a Gen 1 fan, and I don't want to... Yeah, fair enough. Like, I don't know why you would. Like, imagine getting up every 2 minutes to switch a cartridge. I don't even... MP3 players back in the day, you could kind of just switch, by hitting a button, right? You didn't have to change it. I mean, I guess, a CD player or something, maybe. But even a CD has, multiple songs on it. So, I'm just confused who that's really for. And so why is that really the only thing we got for Pokemon's 30th? In terms of the actual anniversary, that's all we got. And I don't even know who it's for. There'd be more than one. This is like a jukebox, but even then, yeah. Gotcha. Because, when... I mean, I guess, the 90s were just before my time. But I imagine that technology wasn't that primitive back then, I imagine that you can have multiple songs on, a CD or a record. Or whatever, right? And... so this would have been a novelty back then. But now it's just, retro garbage. At this point. If you had this Game Boy MP3 player 30 years ago, what would you think of it? Gen 1 just released, and they're announcing a little music player where you have 45 cartridges, 45 songs of that same generation. Would that make it better or worse? It would have been like a cassette player, but even then you'd have a full set of songs. Yeah, exactly. I don't understand why they couldn't have all 45 on one cartridge. Each song is probably what? Half a megabyte? Because they were very limited in their, data space, right? Back then, so each of the songs would have had to been, definitely less than half a megabyte. So they could easily have had all of this in one cartridge. In the 90s, this would have been okay, Yeah, it would have been clunky for sure, like changing the songs every now and then, but if you were an avid Gen 1 fan at the time, I could see it being a little novelty, you know? You're not 30 either, but you grew up in the late 90s, fair enough. So we're probably around the same age, because I'm very early 2000s. But like, I don't know, like back in the day, this would have been a neat little novelty if you really loved Gen 1. But even then, it wouldn't have been necessary. You know, like, and I guess like Nintendo is very particular about how we listen to music, right? Because they got the Nintendo Music app or something, right? Which, you know, I don't really care about. You know, if you find a way to listen to music as you're listening to on screen now, then you can go for it, I reckon. I'm not gonna like pay some kind of subscription service to have a select list of songs to listen to. You know, that's not really my thing. So that's what we got for Pokemon's 30th anniversary in terms of newly announced for this year. So now we'll kind of go over some of the other things in the presents. And, you know, have some conversations throughout. If you ever need to leave, you know, go for it. If you ever join in, then, you know, welcome. But, you know, sit back and relax as we kind of get into it. For the year it is, it's incredibly disappointing. Exactly. For that price, I'll call it trash, but that's all for OMG. Yeah. Exactly. Like, celebrating 30 years of Pokemon, and we get like a $70 trash MP3 player with, I want to say, decent songs. Like Gen 1 music isn't bad per se, you know, it does get remixed a bunch in later gens, but I don't think it's worth it. So it's good that we're on the same page, and hopefully the wider Pokemon community is on our kind of side with this, because you know, Pokemon fans typically buy, like, anything and everything. So I wonder how many people are actually going to buy this, you know? But, Felix Jr. had a better 30th anniversary in the Wreck-It Ralph movie, you know? Like, you know, this is awful. There's no better way to put it. But, we'll move on. Maybe we'll circle back to MP3 player if we get new people in. Alright, what was next? We had info about Pokemon Champions and how it's going to be, you know, used for the VGC. Which, I'll just read you a comment. Again, I'm a Gen 1 fan. I go with my fave gen, mainly for nostalgia, and you're not going to get it. So let that sink in. A Gen 1 fan does not care at all about this MP3 player. That's... I don't know who this is for, really. But, yeah, so the VGC, we got Pokemon Champions, right? I've already got a kind of rant about Pokemon Champions on my channel, where I talk about how it's probably going to have microtransactions, which shouldn't really be a surprise to people. I know that, like, on the website, it does say somewhere it's like, you know, something about you don't have to pay for playing this game or whatever, but that's just some legal, technical jargon. Like, they can go about it in multiple different ways, you know? They can be really manipulative with, like, how they're wording it. But the question is, are we willing to trust that Pokemon and Nintendo won't be charging anything for anything for this free game? Are we really going to trust that? They charge you for storing Pokemon in Pokemon Home. They charge you for online connectivity. Here's a little thing maybe people have or haven't noticed about the Switch games. If if you can play online with others, right? If you paid for the game, you have to pay for NSO. If it's a free-to-play game, you don't have to get NSO, but obviously a free-to-play game has microtransactions. So, you're either paying twice, or you're vulnerable to microtransactions. So, it being a free game means that there's probably going to be microtransactions. Now, what that could be, maybe that is some cosmetics for your Pokemon, like maybe you can equip your Pokemon with like a scarf or something. Maybe. I doubt that, because that might ruin like some of the animations that we've been reusing since 2013, right? We don't want to ruin those. So, what could you be paying for in Pokemon Champions? Well, there are not Unite license, I'm thinking of Pokemon Unite, sorry. You can get, I think, licenses for the Pokemon as like a rental thing, or you can full out like pay the currency to unlock those Pokemon permanently. I think is that even if you transfer from home? Like if you transfer a Dragonite, would you be able to use Dragonite in the game, or do you need to get the license for it? That is the question that everyone should be asking. But also, so not only do you potentially need to pay to even use the Pokemon, right? But we saw that in the Pokemon Presents, there was like a little tournament bracket thing, right? And my assumption is that the free TCG client had, like the old one, I don't know about the new one, but the old one had like a tournament kind of system, and you need to earn tickets to get into that, right? And so the paid aspect of it, I really can't speak today, I need to drink a bit more. And so if you wanted to do like a tournament, you might need to get a ticket. Now that might be a fair amount of online grinding, right? Or that might just be open up your wallet to buy a ticket, so you can do a competitive mode, or like contribute to a battle pass or something. And so I don't think Pokemon would be having it for free. Like, sure, you could play it for free, but your enjoyment of it would be pretty limited. Not only that, but I don't even think it's that necessary. Because, all Pokemon aren't confirmed to be in it. Like, I talked about this before, but in the initial trailer, at the end they're like, yeah, not all Pokemon will be able to be used in Pokemon Champions. Now that could be like the Dexit, like some Pokemon aren't just physically in the game. But it could also be like things like Costume Pikachu. Maybe that's not really allowed. That is pretty vague. But it could be that your favorite Pokemon, like Ledian, for example, might not be in it. And so that's going to be very annoying. It's reusing a bunch of attacks and animations from 2013 when they switched over to 3DS. Like you see Charizard flying, or you see Aegislash do its sword attack. It's like, we've seen this before. We've seen this like for over a decade. If this is a replacement to like Pokemon Stadium, where they had really unique animations, this is garbage. Like, if this is supposed to be like what the world sees in terms of like video game competition, right? Are you really going to be happy with seeing reused animations? Like, I would rather have each Pokemon be expressive with unique animations. Anyone remember how we had Blastoise on the N64, right? Pokemon Stadium 1 and 2. It would use Hydro Pump out of both cannons. Now, I think it kind of does that nowadays, like it has two streams from its cannons. But that's the kind of effort I would expect out of Pokemon. Really? Genuinely seems like a bunch of recycled stuff. Yep. Which, once again, for 30, just why? Can we put more effort into it? That would be great, you know, like... So, I've already got an entire rant about Pokemon Champions on my channel. If you want to look it up sometime, I think it's like... it's titled something along the lines of the worst part of the Pokemon Presents. Something like that. But it has a thumbnail of Pokemon Champions. So if you want more info about my kind of rant about Pokemon Champions and feelings, definitely go check that out. But we'll kind of move on. And because like there wasn't much revealed about Pokemon Champions in terms of new stuff. It was just kind of announcing that it'll be, I guess, like what, April this year, which is a bit surprising because I thought it would be like ready for Pokemon Day, you know. But that's kind of whatever. You're gonna be liking my eating dinner? Fair enough. We'll get on to the next stuff. So, next we got a bunch of mobile game kind of updates. Which is great, you know, like... But that's the kind of thing where it's like, that's in every Pokemon Presents. You know, like, Pokemon Presents 2029. Not 2029. I meant for the 29th anniversary, like last year. They would have had updates for Pokemon, you know, 2023, 2022. You know, they're always going to have the mobile game updates. So, this isn't really anything new. But what is really annoying is that it takes up the majority of this Presents. So, I think it was about 20 to 25 minutes long, all things considered. And about, I want to say about 75%, maybe about 65%, was just mobile game updates. Hey Dino, no crash outs without me, fair enough. We're just ranting about the Pokemon Presents, the 30th anniversary. I don't really know your opinion, so you're welcome to share, but we're past the Game Boy MP3 player, we're past Pokemon Champions, we're now moving on to the mobile game stuff. We haven't done Pokopia or Gen 10 yet. So, we have mobile game updates, which happen, you know, every Pokemon Present, so it's nothing new. But I would prefer it if that kind of stuff was just, like, on a separate announcement channel. Right? Because, like, odds are, if you're in the Pokemon Unite sphere, or if you're in the Pokemon Cafe Remix sphere, you probably already know about these updates. Really. And so they can have just a separate thing, and then we can have, like, a dedicated 20 to 30 minute thing of actual Pokemon stuff. You know? People actually care about kind of stuff. Because, imagine if this, in 20 minutes, right? We get rid of all the mobile game updates. What do we have? We have, like, Pokopia, Champions, the Game Boy Mini Player, and Gen 10. Which, I think, collectively was about... maybe 10 minutes? Or less? So, definitely about half of it. So, if we cut out half of the, you know, the mobile game stuff, right? Then we should be able to have more unique announcements. Like, game remakes that we want, even new anime, new spin-offs, just anything really. Your only opinion is that the whole development team that should have been on Z8 was just programming water the last 5 years. Yeah, so when we get to Gen 10, I'll talk about ZA a bit as well, in terms of, like, the whole development cycle and expectations and stuff. Because, like, while everyone is pretty positive about Gen 10, and I guess to a certain extent I'm cautiously optimistic, this is still Pokemon that we're talking about. You know? Like, there are definitely ways that they could screw it up. So we'll definitely talk about that for later. But yeah, not really much to say about the actual mobile game stuff. You know, like we're getting the legendary birds in Unite as well as the JoJo starters, which I think is pretty funny because like in the first year of Pokemon Unite, the kind of main boss of it was Zapdos. So now you get to play Zapdos, which is kind of funny, if I'm being honest. But that's kind of whatever, right? Pokemon Unite, yay. Remix, TCG Pocket, I don't care about that stuff, to be honest. Like, so we're just gonna get past that. So, now we get to Pokopia. Now, we just had a treehouse for Pokopia like the other day, didn't we? So why are we still getting more news about it? You know? Like, I don't understand what their logic was. If the treehouse was after the presents, that would be something. But they had the presents, they had the treehouse like a few days before this presents. So why is there the treehouse and then the presents? Shouldn't it be the presents then the treehouse? Like, am I going crazy for that? Like, because ideally the treehouse is supposed to be like kind of the last step before it gets into your hands, right? A last little showcase of what the game is like to the general audience. But then having that and then announcing new things in the presents is kind of weird, because then like, in the presents we got DJ Rotom. Yay. I really hate what they've done with Rotom. Since like it became a phone in Gen 7. Like, that's kind of deserving of its own rant, to be honest, but it's whatever. DJ Rotom playing old songs again. Why not? Sure, I guess. Then we got Chef Dente on screen. Now, are we really going to trust a gradient for delivering good food? Like, you know, it's kind of like if a Snorlax or a Licky Tongue was a chef, it's like, would you really trust them to not eat it or, you know, do something with it? You know, like, Graydon probably stores the food in its fur somewhere, so it's gonna have sweat and hair on it. Like, ugh. I would trust a Slurpuff to be a better chef, because they got an excellent sense of smell for food, so they know what exactly is a well-cooked meal, right? But they're also kind of made out of, like, I guess cotton candy or something. So if they were to at least store their food in their body, right, it would at least smell good. I don't know if it would taste different, but it would at least smell better than if it came out of Chef Dente. You know, like, Chef Dente has, like, those, uncle kind of vibes, and you wouldn't want to eat food from your uncle's body. But that's kind of whatever. They showcased a hide and seek kind of thing, which I guess is kind of expected for it's a Ditto game, you know, and I guess you gotta do something in multiplayer. But it really seems like, given the release date of Pokemon this year, that Pokopia is the Pokemon game for the year. Which is surprising, for sure. I don't know how well it's going to sell. Like, how much of the Pokemon fan base is going to want this, and how much of the Switch 2 fan base is going to want this. And if you're like me and you don't have a Switch 2 yet, would Pokopia convince you to get it yet? Like, would you get a Switch 2 because of Pokopia? And that is quite an interesting question, because this is a definitely a different kind of game, a kind of sandbox, you know, but like block game where you can build stuff. And I have tried games like that before. You know, I tried Minecraft. I tried Dragon Quest Builders 2. I tried Dinkum, which is like Australian version of Animal Crossing. You know, so I've tried those games before, and just kind of genre isn't exactly my thing. But for what it is, like, for what this genre is, Pokopia does look pretty good. Like, it does look pretty good for a casual, build a game kind of thing, you know? With all the different Pokemon interactions and stuff. The kind of initial tutorial, pandering to Gen 1 did throw me off for quite a bit. But for what Pokopia is, it does look good for its genre. I just don't think it's my kind of game. So for me, I'm not going to buy a Switch 2 just for Pokopia. And I've said it in the past, right? I will probably get a Switch 2 if Nintendo can release 3 good games in a row. Which shouldn't be too much of a tall order. You know? 3 good games, of course they want to release good games, right? But they're not exactly doing the best in terms of their games. But if they can do 3 in a row, then I'll consider it. But otherwise I'll have to wait until a few years down the line, get a sale, maybe a Switch 2 Lite or something. So that's really going to probably delay my experience of Gen 10, you know? And so I'm wondering how much of the, you know, Nintendo fan base is kind of in my boat. Because it may be a bit of a surprise to some people, but the Switch 2 isn't performing the best. It had a good launch, but that was mostly because they had enough supply to counteract the scalpers. But since then, it didn't do too good. It didn't even do too good over Christmas, I believe, or Black Friday. So, I don't know, like, I don't know how many people are really going to get a Switch 2 for Pokopia, or Pokemon in general. But, this is something that I'm willing to wait and see, because from what I've seen of Pokopia, it does look good. But will that be enough to, you know, transfer over to good sales and good Switch 2 sales? That's up for speculation, but I guess we'll see in about a year's time how well Pokopia contributed to the Switch 2 hype, I guess. So, I think that's all of Pokopia that I wanted to kind of talk about. Oh, no, hang on. I wanted to talk a bit more about Pokopia. Because it feels like ZA was kind of rushed. Right? Maybe, so, hang on. Let me put this into words. So, I'm thinking that early days of testing ZA, right? They're like, oh, this is kind of garbage. We can polish it up and make it into a game that people will buy, right? But they were not happy with ZA's kind of development, right? So they kind of put resources away from ZA into other games. So like maybe more into Winds and Waves, maybe more into Pokopia. And so if like midway through kind of development of ZA they're like, no, this isn't really working out. Maybe the combat system is too hard to implement. Maybe the city is like too graphically taxing for them, right? Maybe they're like, okay, we'll cancel, we'll put effort away from ZA, but we'll put it towards Pokopia and Winds and Waves. Which kind of makes sense, given how good Pokopia is looking, right, for a Pokemon game. And kind of the initial reaction to Gen 10 was like, how good it looks, right? And so, let's finally talk about Pokemon Winds and Waves. Actually, just before that, there was another little thing that kind of caught my attention. So, this month, right, we got told of Pokemon Fire Red and Leaf Green for Switch, right? It wasn't really a announcement in a Pokemon Presents, and so you would expect that in the Pokemon Presents, because nobody really knows about it, because it hasn't been in another Pokemon Presents yet, that they would really talk about it, right? But in this Pokemon Presents, they're just like, yeah, it's coming out today. There's no grand reveal trailer, nothing really. Like, so, like, if you were not really paying attention to the online discourse about Fire Red Leaf Green, right? You had really no way of knowing about Fire Red Leaf Green coming to Switch, right? Because, like, assuming that you're only paying attention to Nintendo Directs and Pokemon Presents, right? You would have no idea that Fire Red Leaf Green is coming to Switch until that day. And all they say is like, yeah, it's come today and they'll be home compatible in the future. Like, what? Hello? You couldn't have had, like, a little announcement trailer for it for your 30th anniversary? You couldn't have had a trailer showcasing, like, leading up to Gen 3 or... I don't understand, like, they had, like, zero fanfare for it. Now, I'm thinking it's because, like, they initially planned for it maybe to be on Pokemon Day announcement, but because of leaks and stuff, they had to announce it earlier. And then they're like, well, since we've announced it earlier, we kind of don't need to have a special presentation, so we'll just kind of airdrop it, you know? So, no matter how they slice it, it is kind of weird. It's a weird situation. And $20 for Nintendo to emulate an old GBA game feels really weird. Like, if they're against us emulating, why are they allowed to emulate? Huh? Now, in terms of, like, the actual new stuff for it, there's, like, not much. I've heard that speedrunners are able to get the event items, like the tickets. So, I guess you can get, like, Deoxys or, like, Lugia, for example. So, I guess that's something. But is it worth it? No. If you want to play it in a different language, you have to buy it again. Great. Just great, really. And so, I guess that was kind of another thing for Pokemon's 30th, but that was also really kind of let down. They just dropped into inventory after the E4. Great. Just great. So it feels like Fire Red Green was supposed to be some epic announcement for Pokemon's 30th, but they've just gone about it in the worst way possible. $20 for one language version of Fire Red Leaf Green, or Leaf Green, sorry. You don't even get, like, online trading. You have to do it locally. It's just... For all intents and purposes, if you bought that, you have been ripped off. Sure, it's convenient, maybe you can make content out of it, right? But, for all intents and purposes, if you bought Fire Red Leaf Green for $20 US, you got ripped off. You know, on the Wii U, apparently the GB games were about $6 or $7. So why would they be $20 on Switch? Why would $7 games over 10 years ago be $20 now? It's not like a supply chain thing, because this is eShop. There's unlimited amounts of these things. So what's the deal here? Like, am I crazy? Like, why would anyone particularly want to get that? Unless they've, like, never played it before, or really want just it on Switch for the convenience, but, like, look, I'm not gonna be, like, telling you or anything, but there are definitely other ways to play it. You know? Just, there are other ways to play Fire Red Leaf Green. Okay. So, now we'll get onto Gen 10. Now, we've been kind of, like, revealed about the Winds and Waves name for quite a bit. Again, like, leakers of, or data leakers, you know, they kind of told us a bit about the game. I haven't really looked into it besides just the name, because I want it to be surprised, right? But maybe that is something I kind of look into and see what they've kind of been saying, because if they said that the title is Winds and Waves, right, then maybe the other things that they've been saying are correct as well. So maybe we know things like the Evil Team or the Legendaries or whatever, you know, like, who knows. But Winds and Waves, it was looking pretty good. Like, the water has been the best that Pokemon has ever seen. And I think it compares to, like, maybe something like Mario Kart World without water. So the water does look good, which is to be expected for, you know, like Pokemon Waves. You know, it's one part of the name, right? So the water looking good is great. It's a pleasant surprise, but it's great. And by extension, the lava physics, because like water, lava, you know, they're kind of liquidy. So I guess their liquids team is like really popping off. The land itself didn't look that great. Like, it was okay, but it could have been better. But it was definitely the water that was mind-blowing, you know? And we didn't really get much info of Winds of Waves. Like, we had, like, maybe underwater sections. That's about it. You know, we got like a lava cavern or something. Sure, why not? I'm guessing the region is placed in Indonesia, which is cool. It's whatever, really. But we didn't get much in terms of the game. But that's probably because it's being released next year. Which means that Gen 9 is the longest generation with like 5 years. Now, that would be kind of annoying, but myself and many other fans have been wanting Pokemon to slow down for a long time. And it kind of feels like, yeah, with Winds and Waves, they have slowed down. They have taken that extra time to really care about it, which is great. So I am cautiously optimistic. However, there are still caveats, you know? Like, are Pokemon going to grow or shrink on the spot? Like, as despawning or spawning in? Like little... Are the cinematic cutscenes just going to be fade to black, or turning on the spot? Turning on the spot, you know? Like, have you seen the, Sword or Shield legendaries, like, walk while turning on the spot? You know? Like, that's kind of garbage. We've had follow Pokemon every now and then, but, you know, sometimes they're like super slow, sometimes they're super fast. It's very inconsistent. It's probably like lore accurate, but it's kind of annoying. You know, like, there are definitely little things that really add up to make me question if it's going to be good. But I'm hoping that because they've taken more time to develop it, that it will be good. But, you know, it's always going to look better in their reveal trailer than it's going to look in your hands, right? You know, like, if it rains over the ocean, would the frames drop to like 10 FPS? Who knows? So it could be that what we saw was like ideal scenario for that environment. If it rains, maybe it doesn't get to that kind of quality. And it wouldn't surprise me. Because one thing that's really been interesting about, I guess, Game Freak is their ability to, well, inability perhaps, to maximize a system. On the Switch, we've had gorgeous games that, you know, they have debatable, like, FPS, but they do look gorgeous. So we've had Breath of the Wild, we've had Xenoblade games, we've even had, you know, third-party games like The Witcher, all kind of doing okay on Switch, like big open world games kind of thing, right? And then it's like ZA is in a small city, and it looks like a PS2 game. Scarlet and Violet had a bunch of bugs and graphical issues, and it looked like a GameCube game. Right? So even though other people are able to have epic open worlds with like monsters and stuff, Pokemon can't. Now, the kind of running joke was that, you know, they just, the Switch is not powerful enough for Pokemon, right? And so if we got a Switch 2, which we do, then they would be able to be the best. But if they're running a PS2 game on Switch, essentially, then are we expecting about PlayStation 3 for the Switch 2? Like, if they're that bad at optimizing for Switch, you know, this is probably going, like, Gen 10 is probably going to be the upper limit of Switch 2. So, Gen 11 isn't going to look any better. Gen 12 isn't going to look any better. Because if they're really, really inefficient about the Switch, then they're probably going to be really, really inefficient about the Switch 2. And so this high quality water is probably the best that Pokemon's going to be for the next 7 years. And it's debatable if it will be as smooth if it starts raining. So there are a lot of potential issues with winds and waves. Time will tell, obviously, but for me, Pokemon has had a lot of misses with the kind of, like, since about Gen 7 onwards, there's been a lot of negativity kind of building up, and so they need a lot to regain my faith, you know? I know that everyone's like, man, this is going to be the best generation ever, you know, it's going to look amazing and stuff, but it needs more than looks to be having good faith for me. You know, it needs decent animations, it needs a pretty good evil team. Wait, okay, we had Team Skull, then Team Yell, then Team Star, you know? Like, we're really going down in terms of, like, the level of evil for an evil team, aren't we? And so, it wouldn't surprise me if the evil team was Team Coconut. They're all about getting all the coconuts on the islands. Do they want to eat it? Do they want to collect it? Do they want to sell it? Who knows? They just want the coconut. Maybe they want the big legendary coconut Pokemon. Like, that wouldn't surprise me. You know, like... that wouldn't surprise me at all. You know? So, it needs more than just graphics to be a good game. Like, is it going to be the turn-based game? Is it going to be the real-time battle combat? Like, what's it going to be? So, it is too early to determine one way or the other how Winds and Waves will go. I am cautiously optimistic, but I am being realistic about my expectations. And so, I don't want that water to be the best thing about the game. I want to be blown away by something else. And I think that's a pretty reasonable expectation. Because I'm not really like a graphics kind of guy, you know? So I don't want the water to be the best part about the game. If that makes sense. So, that's the majority of the game, but of course we do have the starters to talk about. Oh boy. I don't like them. I don't feel fondly about any of them. I don't know if it's like the lighting, or the Pokemon design, or the colors or something, but they don't really feel like Pokemon. You know, like, these are creatures that I would imagine Palworld would have. You know? Like, tell me you're looking at those Pokemon, and you're not thinking of any kind of power world creatures in terms of like the art style or design. Like, I don't know, how are you feeling about them? Because like, it might just be a me thing, but they don't feel like Pokemon. Like, for example, Brout. Terrible name, by the way. Brout. Great. I feel like it could have had more colours or darker colours. It feels a bit too simplistic. You know, like, I feel like if I can kind of maybe draw it in about 30 seconds with like some fill buttons, you know, it's probably not a good Pokemon. I guess like people want to keep it simple, right? But I'd prefer it if they had a bit more design to them. You hate the lizard? Fair enough. The lizard's probably the best one, but it's not by much. So we'll go over them one at a time. We got Brout. Again, terrible name. Like, trying to remember it. It's like, it's an L, I think, so Brow would make sense. But it's Brout. Great. Now, I love Rowlet. And I love Torchic. But I hate Brout. I don't know what exactly it is about it. I think it is just like too much light green. I love green as well, right, as a colour. But it could have had more colour to it. Like, it really just feels like they went fill to colour it, you know? Like, they could have had some browns, maybe some blacks, or even some yellows. Yellow would be hard to see on the green, but maybe, you know? I don't like it. And he looks a bit chunky, not gonna lie. You know, like, if I fully evolve it, will it tell me how to get to Sesame Street? You know? Like, and so, I'm not the biggest fan of the McNugget. Now we go on to Pombon, and I would like you to look at this guy. This guy is called Pombon from Cassette Beast. Now, it looks like Pokemon has kind of just copy-pasted. Like, very much so. Now, I don't want to assume anything, but in this day and age, right, it would be pretty easy to type some kind of prompt into an AI and have Pombon from Cassette Beast be a reference image for the creation of Pombon. You know, like, what are the odds that, you know, Pokemon would also have a fire-type Pomeranian? It could have been a water type, it could have been a different dog. There's a bunch of dogs to choose from. But it had to be another fire-type Pomeranian. I think I'm saying that right? But you get what I mean, like, that dog species. They both had to be fire-type? Really? We couldn't have had this as a grass starter, at least? I don't know, man. And if you haven't played Cassette Beast, definitely recommend. If you love Pokemon, I would recommend Cassette Beast. If you hate modern Pokemon, definitely recommend Cassette Beast. It's available on all platforms, I believe, and it does go on sale for a fair bit, but really recommend. If you are needing a Pokemon game this year, go for Cassette Beast. Just trust me on that. Anyway, so also Pombon kind of feels like an early game encounter. You know? We've had Pokemon like Poochyena, Yamper, Fido, Lillipup. You know? Like, it feels like an early game encounter. And people are like, oh, but that means you get a fly type early on. It's like, well, how are we feeling about, like, Fletchling? That's a fire type bird. Like, it's not a fire type immediately, but evolves into a fire type pretty quickly, right? And people kind of like Talonflame, you know? So, having a fire type early on isn't the worst thing? Question mark? So it really feels like just something that you would catch early on. I also don't know if it's going to be standing up straight on its final evolution. You know, like, it could be similar to Incineroar, where it just stands up and becomes like a dog man, you know? So I don't know what they're going to do with Pombon, but if I was to play Winds and Waves, I wouldn't pick it because I love Cassette Beasts. And I would feel awkward using a rip-off. A copy-paste, you know? And then we get to Gekwa. Anyone else getting Sobble vibes? Like, it's a watertight lizard, right? It's basically Sobble 2.0. Now, are we going to love this Pokemon's evolutions the same way that we love Drizzile and Inteleon, which are Pokemon that people don't usually list as their favourite? Like, it's not really their favourite kind of Pokemon. They don't like Inteleon to an extent, but they hate Drizzile. Like, Drizzile is like possibly one of the worst Pokemon according to modern Pokemon fans, and you know, I can kind of see it. Talk about a copy paste, exactly. Like for Pombon and Pombom, the only difference is like 2 letters. You're replacing an MB with an N. I mean, I can show the evolution of Pombom, rather. But if you want to play Cassette Beast, then you know you'll experience it for yourself. But Pombom does have an evolution, and it looks okay. Not as cute as Pombom. Pombom is kind of like the mascot creature of Cassette Beast, by the way. Anyway, so Drizzile. People don't like it. Inteleon. People don't like the theme of it being just like a James Bond kind of sniper, right? It feels like, I don't know if it's just me, but it feels really weird when Pokemon is super referential to the real world, you know? So the Gen 8 starters with them all being UK stereotypes, I hate that. You know, I'm fine with something like Greninja, right? But something like Inteleon, not a big fan of. And so, it could really go any kind of direction with Gekwa. And let us remember the Quaxley, the Donald Duck of Gen 9, right? People like it with this little introduction of like the switching of the hair kind of thing. But then they evolve it, and it starts dancing. And they hate it. And so no matter what you feel like, no matter how you feel about Gekwa, it could be the worst of the 3. You know? So, like, I like Gekwa out of the 3 of those the most, right? But if I was to pick Gekwa, I would be, like, really hoping that it has a good evolution. Like, I would be scared to evolve it. I might just hit the B button just to keep it, you know? Like, I don't know, like, Sobble 2.0, and I'm not the biggest fan of it, but it does have, I think, the most potential. But I don't trust Sprout, and I would go with Pombon if it wasn't for Pombom being a thing. And I'm, you know, thinking about pressing the B button for Gekwa. So, none of these starters are particularly good for me. Maybe I'll just go for a playthrough without the starter. You know, see how I go with that. But, I don't know if it's just me, but they don't really feel like Pokemon, and cautiously optimistic. That is the key phrase of the stream. And, of course, after that, we got nothing. That was the end of the presents. They didn't even talk about this game, Usually they reveal a game and then be like, hey, this is Pokemon Winds and Waves. You know, this will be taking place in this region, it'll be coming out next year. Only available on Switch 2. You know, they'll talk about it, right? Which I feel like is pretty commonplace, right? Reveal an epic new game that everyone's been asking for, and then talk about it. Duh. But they didn't. And it's like, what? This could Winds and Waves been announced next year? Yes. I mean, depending on like when in the year it's going to be released. But if they announced Winds and Waves next year, and then talked about it, that would be something. So I don't know what their kind of reasoning is for doing it this way. Like, it would have been great to learn anything about it, really. But what we can learn about it is that, based off the covers for it, right, they aren't a box art legendary, right? Sword and Shield, box art legendary. Scarlet Violet, box art legendary. Pretty much all of them, I think, have a box art legendary. Except for, like, you know, the very early ones, right? Gen 1. And so, no box art legendary. Very interesting. Very interesting indeed. But, I guess we'll wait and see. I just found it surprising that they didn't want to talk about their creation. Almost as if they're ashamed of it, or they don't have that much information themselves. Who's to say, really? And so that was Pokemon's 30th anniversary. Reminder, 30 years, 3 decades of Pokemon. All leading to this day. And we got a Game Boy MP3 player, some mobile game announcements that people won't care about in the future, and an announcement for a game for next year. Great. And, you know, I am a bit of a pessimist about Pokemon. I'm also a bit of a realist about Pokemon. And I feel like I had more appreciation, more better predictions about what would show up than what we actually got. Like, I didn't think I would be overshooting it, you know? You know, I was predicting, like, Poke Park 1 and 2. You know, we had some talks about Pokemon Ranger coming, maybe. That would be great. You know, just something interesting. You know, announcement of a new spin-off game, announcement of just really anything, but not in an MP3 way. Like, come on, really. Like, so, it is surprising that I, of all people, had better expectations of Pokemon's 30th. I feel like that's just kind of weird. So, I guess, right, for Pokemon's 40th, you know, if we're lucky we can get a coloring book, but, you know, I'm going to predict for Pokemon's 40th anniversary that we'll get a MP3 player Gen 2 music. Hooray! Or, do you reckon we'll get a MP3 player of Gen 1, but from Fire Red Leaf Green? Like, we'll get the Gen 3 remakes. Wouldn't that be exciting? Yay! Like, this has set the bar so low for what a Pokemon anniversary is. Now, sure, like, the Nintendo's not exactly great with their anniversaries recently. Like, we've had some Mario and Zelda Donkey Kong anniversaries, and they kind of just came and gone, right? But for Pokemon, this is like worse than expected. Like, I was basing my predictions off the Mario 35th anniversary, which is a weird way, like a weird year to celebrate, right? Like, usually you go like decades or whatever, but they're going 35th. But Mario's 35th anniversary had more love than Pokemon's 30th anniversary. And so going forward, we can't really predict much. Anyone that's like, yeah, I would love a remake, I would love a new game. No. You cannot do that anymore because of Pokemon's 30th. In the future, when Pokemon 40th anniversary is coming around, you better be expecting an MP3 player or around that kind of quality. You can't expect any kind of remake. You can't expect, or if you do expect a remake, it's going to be an overpriced one. Let's be honest. It's going to be an overpriced version of Diamond and Pearl for 40th. Great. $30, Diamond and Pearl. Why not? That could be on purpose though. Like, you mean like the lowering of expectations? I don't know exactly what you're talking about. But like, if it's on purpose, like, just setting the bar so low, so what? They could have a interesting reveal later on. That's a really weird way to go about it. Like, how long is Pokemon really going to go on for? We've just gotten over 1,000 Pokemon, right? Is Gen 10 going to be the final generation? Or are we going to milk it till the end of time and we're going to have Generation 20 in about 2050? You know, we'll have 2,050 Pokemon in 2050. How long is Pokemon really going to go on for? How many times can we go through the same adventure over and over again, right? There might not be a Pokemon 40th anniversary. And having a bad anniversary now, so that people lower their expectations for an even better anniversary later on, is insane. Like, if they are doing it, I guess, but like, is it really worth it? Why not just have a good presentation now, and then a good anniversary later? Like, I don't get what the mindset is here. Having a bad 30th, so that they could have a better 35th or better 40th? Maybe? But like, why not cash in on previous anniversaries of expectations for the 30th? Like, reducing people's expectations isn't really good, because then it's like reducing their investment and excitement for it, and if people aren't invested or excited in the Pokemon games, they're probably not going to get it, right? So if there's so much of a buzzkill, right, maybe people won't be buying the Pokemon games. You know, like, I'm certainly on the fence about it, because like, if this is how Pokemon treats their 30th, then I guess I love Pokemon more than they do. And I'm, as we're here, right, I'm ranting about this stuff. Like, I don't get it. I mean, they're Japanese and Nintendo, they're Pokemon, so it's no surprising I don't understand what they're thinking. But I really don't get it. And so I think that's been the rant. Just trying to think if there's anything else really. Oh, right, with ZA, right? They could have announced or released the ZA DLC on the anniversary, right? But they decided to have it for December, which is a really weird choice because they announced the DLC before the game came out, and then they released the DLC 2 months after the game came out. So they 100% had that content, and then they just like, then they just kind of snipped that out of the post game and sold it as DLC. Like, in the DLC you get over level 100 Pokemon, but you catch it in it's like over 20 or 30. What are you gonna do with that in the post game, huh? Like, you need to level it up. How are you gonna level it up? Oh, well, you need candies. How are you gonna get candies? Well, you're gonna go into hyperspace, because you may as well do the post-game content, right? In the post-game content, you can get the small or medium candies. In the post-game content, you can get small or medium candies. For post-game, I'd expect the only candies to be like the biggest or second biggest ones. Right? Because what else are you going to do with them? Like, what good is a small candy for when you need like level 80 plus Pokemon and you get a level 20 Pokemon? Yay, I got a small candy, I can maybe level it up to level 21. No, you need big candies in order to keep the player investment. It's such a grind. So, it feels like really mismanaged post-game activity sold as DLC. Now, this could have been released on Pokemon Day, and it would have been better than releasing it 2 months after the game came out. It would have had a better public perception. It would still be garbage in terms of press for quality, right? But it would at least be perceived better. So, because they basically have nothing this year besides Pokopia. You know, maybe you really care about Pokemon Champions, whatever, right? But Pokemon is really banking on Pokopia doing well today. Well, not today, but this year. Pokopia is the Pokemon game for the year. How do you feel about that? Pokopia is the Pokemon game for the year. I think that's about it for the rant, to be honest. I think I've said everything I kind of wanted to say. So if you are listening like now or in the future, you know, I guess you can let me know in the comments about, you know, if I'm spitting facts or if I'm kind of crazy. Like, you know, is this top hat a tinfoil hat? Who knows? But I feel like, well, I hope that a lot of the Pokemon fan base is similar to my kind of thought process about this. I know that people are excited about wins and waves, but again, it's Pokemon, it's Nintendo. What's going to be the price of good quality water? Is it going to be a bad story? Is it going to be bad gameplay? Who knows? I just know that it's a bit too good to be true at this moment. They need a lot of good faith in order to get me to really believe in it. You know, how do you feel about the little Game Boy MP3 player? Apparently about $70, give or take. For 45 songs, 45 cartridges. How do you feel about the starter Pokemon? How do you feel about Chef Dente serving you a greasy burger from its fur? How do you feel about Pokemon Champions being, the way that people will see the VGC? You know, how do you feel about 2013 animations being on a mobile phone? Great. How do you feel about a bunch of mobile game stuff that took up the majority of the presentation that could have been part of its own separate direct? How do you feel about the Nintendo Treehouse of Pokopia being before the Pokemon Presents? How do you feel about the Shadow Drop mention of Fire Red Leaf Green in terms of the Presents? How do you feel about just anything that happened on that Presents? Let me know in the comments below. I would like to thank you all for watching, and I'll see you guys later.